What if you woke up tomorrow and the verb to be vanished? Let's say the government abolished it and they make the penalty for using it death. Could you survive? Now, some of you in the audience might not even know what this verb even is, and I can see a few nervous faces out there, and there's a pop quiz at the end of this presentation, but by the end of this, you guys should be familiar with the verb itself. So for those of you that don't know, to be is the most commonly used verb in the English language. From Shakespeare's famous "to be or not to be" to philosopher René Descartes' "I think, therefore I am," the verb has dominated a wide variety of scholastic disciplines over time, and many have contemplated its significance. The Oxford English Corpus ranks the word be as the second most written word in English. First place, surprisingly, goes to the. There are 8 words on this screen plus contractions, and they dominate the way that we communicate with each other. If you don't believe me, think about the last time that you met someone you didn't know. The conversation could have gone something like this. Hi, my name is John. I'm Terry, it's nice to meet you. What's your major? I'm a bio major. It's my 3rd year here. Me too. Where are you from? Now, John and Terry wouldn't survive very long in this new world. In fact, it might seem impossible not to use to be in conversation. But I believe that this new government could bring a new society and perhaps even a better society. And this idea of removing to be came from 2 linguists named David Borland and Alfred Korzybski. They hated the verb so much that in 1965, they proposed to eradicate the verb completely from English. And they called this new form of restricted language English prime. And this might sound familiar to some of you. If you've read George Orwell's famous novel 1984, you would have heard of a restricted language called newspeak. And restricted language is a very familiar concept to Orwell, who actually proposed to eradicate certain words from English in a form called Basic English, which cut the language down to a bare bones of 850 words. Now, to put that in perspective, Standard English currently has 470,000 words. Now, in Orwell's case, we can see that a language of this size and strength doesn't have any positive benefits. But I believe that Borland and Korzybski's language, English prime, provides numerous benefits when instilled on a personal level. Most linguists consider the word is as an equal sign. So for example, John is a good student. John equals a good student. That sounds simple enough, right? But let me ask you, is it possible to be more than one thing at the same time? Of course it is. And Spanish philosopher George Santayana puts this perfectly. He says, "The little word is has its tragedies. It marries and identifies different things with the greatest innocence, and yet no two are ever identical." So let's go back to John. When you think of a good student, what do you think? I can guarantee you that John doesn't pop into my head. Often, is statements, as we'll call them, put people or things into boxes. We draw preconceived notions about a person when we hear, he is blonde, she is smart, she is rich. You can't let the words that describe you define you. French surreal artist René Magritte painted this in 1928. It's called "The Treachery of Images," and the text at the bottom says, "This is not a pipe." And I wouldn't blame some of you in the audience for thinking, but it is a pipe. But it's not. It's not literally a pipe. We can't hold it. We can't smoke out of it. When looking at a map, what do you see? Although we can grasp the concept of a map, it does not accurately depict reality. We aren't seeing the world as it really is through a map. The map is not the territory. The map represents the territory. It isn't a pipe. It represents our concept of a pipe. It shadows the image of a pipe. Using English prime creates less ambiguity and more clarity. To be statements reflect upon our depiction of reality and is not an unbiased depiction of reality. We all have different experiences of the same event, so why should we paint it as fact? Instead of saying John is a good student, why not say, through his experience in the honors program, John excels as a student? That is a more accurate depiction of reality, and it creates less room for questions. Daniel Zimmerman, a professor at Middlesex College, imposed English prime onto his writing students. He felt that teachers and handbooks have long and ineffectually suggested that writers seek stronger alternatives to the verb to be. And the result of his experiment? Zimmerman found that his college-level students did not know anything about English despite being fluent in it. Despite giving them a list of excluded words, after their second, third, even fourth drafts, he found dozens of mistakes. Even when successfully omitting all of the excluded words, the students created an ungrammatical Creole language, which is a mixture of standard English and English prime that contains sentences with no verbs at all. For example, students wrote, "He a good student," or "We going out to eat this weekend." We use language most obviously to communicate, but language can also affect our actions. The principle of linguistic relativity, or the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, states that the structure of a human being's language influences the manner in which one perceives reality, as well as how one behaves with respect to it. And the most common example used is snow. We have one word for it in English, but in certain indigenous Eskimo languages, they have up to 30 words for it based on the region and the environment that they live in. Cognitive therapists encourage the use of English prime to reduce the stress and warped perspective of patients. For example, saying "I am a failure" sounds permanent and all-encompassing, as if it's part of someone's personality characteristic. To be statements trigger emotional and mental turmoil, while the English prime alternatives, such as "I feel like a failure" or "I have failed my exam," are temporary and adjustable. When I was in high school, I used to share my creative writing with my English teacher. Before she even had a chance to read it, I would apologize and say things like, "I'm so sorry, it's horrible, that part really needs work, it's bad." And one day, she told me that, "Abby, you are your own worst enemy." And while I already had those suspicions, it changed my perspective on how I dealt with writing. It wasn't bad, it needed work. If you take anything out of this presentation today, it's not how to dominate the world with words. I would like you to have a self-awareness of the words that you say, not only to others, but yourself. Because even removing a two-letter word like "is" can have a monumental impact. Thank you.